Most games are designed to make you feel like a hero from the very first minute. They give you powerful weapons, clear directions, and a map full of markers telling you exactly where to go. But in 2011, a game arrived that did the exact opposite. It dropped you into a dying world, gave you a broken sword, and told you almost nothing. That game was Dark Souls. At the time, many people thought it would be too frustrating for a mainstream audience. They thought players wanted to be pampered and guided. Instead, Dark Souls became a global phenomenon that changed the way we think about difficulty, storytelling, and world design. It did not just create a new genre, it redefined what an action role-playing game could be. To understand why this game still holds so much power over the industry today, we have to look back at where it started and how it broke every rule in the book. The story of Dark Souls begins with a project that was originally considered a failure. Before Dark Souls existed, there was a game called Demon's Souls. It was developed by FromSoftware, a Japanese studio known for niche titles. During its development, the project was struggling. It was an ambitious fantasy game that felt clunky and confusing. That was until a man named Hideki Miyazaki took over as the director. Miyazaki was not a traditional game designer. He had a background in social science and had spent his childhood reading Western fantasy books that he could only half understand. Because his English wasn't perfect, he had to use the illustrations and the few words he knew to fill in the gaps with his own imagination. This experience of piecing together a story from fragments would later become the foundation for how Dark Souls tells its story. When Demon's Souls finally launched, it was not an immediate hit. Sony, the publisher, was so worried about its difficulty and slow pace that they chose not to release it outside of Japan. But then something strange happened. Players began importing the game from other countries. Word of mouth spread across the internet about a game that was brutally hard but incredibly rewarding. This cult success gave Miyazaki the chance to create a spiritual successor, a game that would take those ideas and perfect them. When Dark Souls was released, the marketing focused heavily on one phrase: prepare to die. This gave the impression that the game was just a digital torture chamber designed to make players quit. But those who actually played it discovered something much deeper. The difficulty was not there to be mean, it was there to create a sense of genuine stakes. In most games, death is just a minor setback that resets you to a checkpoint 30 seconds ago. In Dark Souls, death has a cost. You lose your accumulated souls, which serve as both experience points and currency. To get them back, you have to travel all the way to where you died without dying again. If you fail, those souls are gone forever. This mechanic changed the way players approached every hallway and every corner. It forced them to slow down, to observe their surroundings, and to respect the enemies. It turned the game into a test of patience rather than just a test of reflexes. But even as players began to master the combat, they realized that the world they were exploring was far more complex than it first appeared. One of the most legendary aspects of Dark Souls is its world design. The land of Lordran is a masterpiece of vertical architecture. Most open-world games are flat and spread out, but Lordran is built like a giant interconnected tower. You might spend hours fighting your way down into a poisonous swamp, only to find an elevator that takes you right back up to the very first area of the game. This sense of physical connection makes the world feel like a real place rather than just a series of levels. There are no loading screens between areas, and you can often see distant landmarks that you will eventually visit. This design creates a feeling of constant discovery. You aren't just following a path, you are uncovering the bones of an ancient civilization. However, as players climbed higher and delved deeper, they noticed that the game was keeping its biggest secrets hidden in the most unlikely places. The way Dark Souls tells its story is perhaps its most influential feature. There are very few cutscenes and almost no traditional dialogue that explains the plot. Instead, the story is hidden in item descriptions, the placement of bodies, and the visual details of the environment. If you want to know who a certain boss was before they went mad, you have to read the description of the soul they dropped. If you want to understand why a certain knight is dead in a specific corner of a castle, you have to look at the armor he is wearing and compare it to the lore of the surrounding area. This forced the community to work together. Players began hanging out on forums and message boards, sharing their theories and trying to piece together the history of Lordran. This created a sense of mystery that few other games have ever matched. The game treats the player like an adult, trusting them to pay attention and find the answers for themselves. This lack of hand-holding extended to the gameplay as well, leading to some of the most frustrating and famous moments in gaming history. The bosses of Dark Souls are more than just big enemies with a lot of health. They are puzzles that require the player to learn and adapt. Every boss has a pattern, a set of tells that signal what they are about to do next. The first time you encounter a boss like the Great Grey Wolf Sif or the gargoyles on the roof of the church, you will likely lose. But each loss provides information. You learn when to dodge, when to block, and when it is safe to attack. This creates a loop of failure and growth. When you finally defeat a boss that has been killing you for hours, the feeling of relief and triumph is unlike anything else in gaming. It is a shot of pure dopamine that makes all the struggle feel worth it. But the game does not just challenge your skills, it also challenges your emotions. Many of the bosses are not villains in the traditional sense. They are often tragic figures who are simply trying to protect what little they have left in a world that is fading away. This emotional weight makes the victories feel bittersweet, leaving players wondering if they are actually the hero of the story or just another force of destruction. As the popularity of the game grew, so did the discussion surrounding its online features. Dark Souls has a very unique multiplayer system. You do not just join a lobby with your friends. Instead, you see the ghosts of other players running around in your world. You see their bloodstains, which show you how they died, acting as a warning for what lies ahead. You can leave messages on the ground for others to read, offering advice or sometimes tricking them into jumping off a cliff. This creates a sense of passive cooperation. You feel like you are part of a community of people all struggling through the same nightmare, even if you are playing alone. Then there's the invasion system. Other players can literally force their way into your game to hunt you down. This adds a layer of unpredictable tension to an already stressful experience. You might be carefully navigating a narrow ledge when a red phantom suddenly appears, blocking your path. It was a controversial mechanic that many found unfair, but it fits perfectly with the game's theme of a harsh, uncaring world. Yet, despite the constant threat of death from both monsters and men, players found a strange sense of comfort in the ruins of Lordran. The legacy of Dark Souls can be seen in almost every action game released in the last decade. It popularized the stamina bar combat system, where every swing of your sword and every dodge costs energy. This stopped players from just mashing buttons and forced them to be tactical. We see this influence in games like Assassin's Creed, God of War, and even Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. The term soulslike has become its own subgenre, describing games that focus on high difficulty, environmental storytelling, and loss upon death. But while many games try to copy the formula, few manage to capture the same balance. Some games make things hard just for the sake of being hard, forgetting that Dark Souls is always fair. Every trap can be spotted if you are looking, and every attack can be avoided if you are careful. This fairness is what keeps players coming back even after their 100th death. Even years after its release, Dark Souls remains relevant because it taps into a fundamental human experience, the struggle against overwhelming odds. The game is a metaphor for perseverance. It tells you that no matter how many times you fail, you only truly lose if you give up. This philosophy has resonated with millions of people, some of whom have even credited the game with helping them through difficult times in their real lives. The world of Dark Souls is dark, cold, and dying, but there is a beauty in the struggle to keep the fire going. It reminds us that victory is only meaningful if there was a real chance of failure. As we look at the modern landscape of gaming, full of microtransactions and endless tutorials, Dark Souls stands as a reminder that players are capable of more than we think. It proved that there is a massive audience for games that are challenging, mysterious, and unapologetically themselves. Looking back, the evolution of the series shows just how much the industry has changed. From the experimental days of Demon Souls to the massive open world of Elden Ring, the core philosophy has remained the same. Miyazaki and his team at FromSoftware have never compromised on their vision. They stayed true to the idea that the player should earn their progress. This consistency has built a level of trust between the developer and the fans that is rare in the modern age. Every new release is treated as a major event, not just because of the graphics or the brand name, but because players know they are about to embark on a journey that will test them in ways other games won't. Dark Souls didn't just define a decade of RPGs, it set a standard for how games can respect the intelligence and determination of the person holding the controller. In the end, Dark Souls is about more than just a high difficulty level. It is about the stories we create for ourselves when we are pushed to our limits. It is about the friends we make through white soapstones and the enemies we face in the dark. It is about the moments of quiet beauty, like looking out over Anor Londo for the first time after surviving the horrors of Sen's fortress. It is a game that demands your full attention and rewards you with a sense of accomplishment that stays with you long after you turn off the console. Whether you are a veteran who has beaten the game dozens of times or a newcomer who is still struggling to get past the first boss, the impact of this journey is undeniable. Dark Souls remains the benchmark for hardcore RPGs because it understands that the greatest rewards come from the greatest challenges. It taught an entire generation of gamers that it is okay to die, as long as you are willing to get back up and try again. To summarize, Dark Souls changed gaming by focusing on fair but high difficulty, an interconnected world that rewards exploration, and a unique way of telling stories through the environment. It rejected the trend of holding the player's hand and instead trusted them to find their own way through a dark and complex world. Its influence can be felt in almost every modern action game, proving that its design principles are timeless. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history and impact of Dark Souls, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. Let me know in the comments what your first experience with the game was like, and share this video with anyone who is still trying to beat their first Souls-like. Your support helps me keep making these long-form documentaries for you. Would you like me to continue the script with more details about the specific lore of the bosses, or perhaps a deep dive into the development of the sequels?